Our disgusting tale of anomalous nastiness begins in the humble town of Beckley, West Virginia, back in the 1990s. It was 10 a.m. on a hot day in early August, as Oscar Doug was winding his way through the wooded roads and back streets of town. He isn't the villain of our story, he's just a man doing his very unglamorous job, cleaning up roadkill for the local government. Plenty of woodland critters meet their ends against the wheels and bumpers of careless drivers, and it was thanks to the tireless work of people like Oscar Doug that the fine roads of rural America aren't piled high with carcasses. Of course, Oscar was used to seeing some unpleasant things on the job, but nothing like this. When he began pulling over to the side of the lonely street to pick up a dead deer, he was shocked to see a sudden flash of stark white illuminated by his headlights. It was a naked human woman crouched over the deer carcass. She was sucking at the exposed red flesh on the deer's flank as though feeding off of it. Flies circled around her in the hot summer air. The smell emerging from the deer carcass was unspeakable, but the woman didn't even seem to care. She just fed away with a crazed look in her eye. And even more disturbing was the fact that he recognized her. It was Mrs. Faber, a local eccentric who lived with her husband on a farm just outside of town. Or at least, she had. You see, Oscar Doug had never met Mrs. Faber in person before. He only recognized her from the missing person flyers posted around town. He pulled out his cell phone to call the authorities, when suddenly Mrs. Faber was startled by something and fled into the woods. This would be the first of many encounters reported by townsfolk concerning Mrs. Faber, or more specifically, the anomalous species that was once Mrs. Faber and is now designated SCP-726. Mrs. Faber practically became a local cryptid, similar to that of Sasquatch or the Loch Ness Monster, with sightings of her in the woods and around town frequently being reported by the locals. Of course, Mr. Faber was beside himself about the whole situation. What was happening to his beloved wife? People assumed a psychotic break or some kind of sudden onset of acute dementia. She had to be apprehended and brought in for her own good before she caused harm to herself or others. And on August 16th, she was finally found and captured. Mrs. Faber was found in the dumpster of a local diner with a large dog. After being subdued, she was sent to a nearby hospital. Her condition had seemingly advanced to the point where she was no longer even capable of speech. However, if it had ended there, the SCP Foundation wouldn't have been called in. It would have just been a sad local story of a woman who became very unwell. But that was only the beginning to the true strangeness behind SCP-726. Random livestock, like cows and pigs, were found across the town, behaving incredibly bizarre, exhibiting actions and traits uncommon of their respective species. And the most shocking of all was that the sightings of Mrs. Faber around town still didn't stop, despite her being actively held by a local hospital. Naturally, that's when the SCP Foundation decided to take control of the situation. They dispatched field agents to properly investigate and figure out what was going on in Beckley, West Virginia. That's when they discovered a peculiar commonality: maggots. You see, the behavior exhibited by the strange animals and by Mrs. Faber was not consistent with their own species, but they were incredibly consistent with the behaviors of the common botfly, a particularly unpleasant form of fly that sometimes lays its eggs in the bodies of still living animals. The anomalously affected entities exhibited insectoid movements, an affinity for rotting meat, and even strange shifting of the back muscles, suggesting the gesture of flapping wings that weren't there. But what was going on here? Was this mind control, or something more insidious? As it turned out, the key to unlocking this mystery was in the dumpster that Mrs. Faber was found in. An entire pig was found inside the dumpster, exhibiting the same strange behaviors as the other anomalous animals. But not long before it was transformed into a pig, it was simply a half-eaten hot dog thrown to waste in the garbage. This miraculous transformation came courtesy of SCP-726, now also known as the Reconstructive Maggots. Much like regular maggots, these creatures are attracted to decaying flesh and will multiply and consume dead bodies or rotten food rapidly. However, the truly strange thing is what happens afterward. The maggots will expel purified waste matter, which then reconstitutes back into a kind of living, exact clone of the entity it once was. Well, exact in a physical sense. In a psychological sense, these clones are exactly like a mature botfly. The maggots that reconstitute these bodies die off almost immediately, but whenever two of these clones mate, with reproductive behavior often being inspired by the presence of carcasses or spoilt meat, they produce more eggs, which in turn release SCP-726 maggots and begin the cycle all over again. And fascinatingly, these maggots can reconstitute an entire clone from even a portion of the original creature. Which begs the question, why were there seemingly multiple Mrs. Fabers sighted in and around the town of Beckley, West Virginia? Upon further investigation into Mrs. Faber and her husband, a terrible secret came to light. Mr. Faber had murdered his wife in a fit of rage and cut up her body before burying the pieces around the grounds of his home. Unbeknownst to him, an infestation of SCP-726 maggots across the property ate each piece and reconstituted them into individual fly-brained clones of the original. Mr. Faber was later arrested for the murder, and multiple people in the town of Beckley were given amnestic treatment to forget the strange and frightening things they'd seen. But for the Foundation, the strange and frightening things were only just beginning. An unnamed doctor with the SCP Foundation decided to conduct a series of utterly repulsive experiments on SCP-726, opening the log with the fateful words, "I've decided to begin by testing the limits of repeated replication. A single SCP-726 egg will be introduced per sample. Due to their rapid multiplication, maggot volume does not affect their speed of operation, only the size of the organism to be reconstructed." The first subject was a recently deceased Norwegian rat, cut in half lengthwise. When the SCP-726 eggs were introduced, the two halves were rapidly constituted into a pair of living rats with mirrored fur patterns. Both of these rats were then ground into a fine paste and mixed. Wondering if SCP-726 would create a hybrid, they did not, instead separating the mix into two piles and once again creating two rats, nearly identical to the ones before, except for one of them now having a red right eye. The rat without the red right eye was processed into a fine paste, get used to hearing that phrase, before the introduction of more SCP-726 samples. It reproduced a close approximation of the rat it once was, aside from a slight limp and blindness in both eyes. The heart was then taken from this rat, and upon the introduction of SCP-726 into the heart, it was reconstituted without eyes or any pigmentation. A note also mentions that the creature squeaked incessantly. The heart from this rat was then taken and cut in half before SCP-726 was introduced. The result was a pair of even more severely messed up eyeless rats. One could only walk in tight circles, and the other immediately attacked the first rat. The doctor noted that both physiology and insect behavior seemed to degrade with repeated reconstitutions of the same genetic material. Next, a scrap of flesh was taken from the hairless rat. The creature that reconstituted from this was hairless, eyeless, and limbless, and didn't successfully survive for long. A liver was found inside its brain case. But because this particular researcher hadn't spit in the face of God enough for one day, the tests continued. The liver from the brainless rat was given a dose of SCP-726, and the result was an eyeless, legless, limbless creature with a long, worm-like midsection, which quickly began to devour its own posterior before dying of blood loss. This dead rat was then put through 3 more iterations of testing. It first became a large, formless mass of tissue, and then a long, slug-like creature that takes in nutrients through its skin. After this, no more changes were recorded, as it had presumably reached its peak performance. The scientists decided to keep this creature for long-term observation, naming it Brundle, after the scientists in David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly. At this point, the doctor began to conduct tests that, mercifully, did not involve any more rats. Instead, the Foundation moved on to humans. Dried flesh from a body that's over 2,000 years old was given to SCP-726, leading to a full reconstitution of a middle-aged man with the mind of a fly. opening doors to potential practical forensic applications of SCP-726. Humans seem to experience a similar degree of form degradation after multiple reconstitutions from the same genetic material. But due to humans being larger and more complex organisms, the changes are often less pronounced, like changes in eye color or fingerprints. While the forensic use of SCP-726 is an open door, clones produced by SCP-726 are worthless for both medical and food purposes. During one experiment, SCP-726 was used to replace a missing chunk of a wounded D-Class's leg. This appeared to be successful at first, until the D-Class later experienced a rapid mental devolution into a fly-like state, just like the other victims of SCP-726. The D-Class was terminated, and the test was recorded as a failure. It's believed that a similar thing would happen if organ transplants were taken out of SCP-726 clones and given to non-anomalous donors. SCP-726 was used to clone several livestock animals, such as cows and pigs. Food items like steaks were rendered from these animals, cooked and given to D-Classes. Much like the transplants, this led to a similar state of devolution for those who ate the infected meat. Even when the meat was thoroughly disinfected and processed, the anomalous effects remained. So no, SCP-726 won't be ending world hunger anytime soon. Though if it gave us all the minds of flies through tainted meat, it may at least end all global warfare, seeing as flies don't have the mental capacity to create or wield weapons. At this point, it seemed that the researcher was just curious and felt like trying some other random experiments just for the heck of it, like getting SCP-726 to reconstitute a non-anomalous botfly, leading to the clone simply being an unusually large botfly which died shortly thereafter, or testing a burger patty from a local independent drive-thru restaurant that reconstituted into 2 different cows and 1 large rat. Yummy. But the most horrifying result of all came when they tested SCP-726 on what was supposedly a vegan burger, made entirely out of artificial meat and plant matter. The resulting creatures were so unimaginably horrifying they literally cannot be described. Even hardened SCP Foundation researchers were driven to scream and vomit at the mere sight of them. One of these creatures was killed and ground into fine paste before SCP-726 was introduced again. Somehow this resulted in something even worse. A truly horrifying unkillable entity on par with SCP-682. Even when they liquefied the beast, it kept attacking. They could only stop it by freezing it and keeping it on ice. Testing into SCP-726 was suspended shortly thereafter. Maggots, botflies, and rat paste. How lovely. If you were eating during any of this, well, you only have yourself to blame. Disturbing things had been happening on the 5th floor of the Rose Heights apartment building in Albany, New York. Residents had reported strange noises over the last few days. Screaming in the night, pained muttering, soft weeping, scratching and scuttling in the walls, and worst of all, what seemed like an infestation of bugs unlike anything the unfortunate occupants of Rose Heights had ever seen before. They weren't abnormal in size or shape. They looked an awful lot like the common earwig, around 2.5 centimeters long with large curved pinchers on the back. But the color wasn't right. Unlike the usual dark brown, these earwigs were a silvery, almost translucent gray. When people spotted them crawling across their walls or hiding in the carpet, they seemed to shimmer in the light. Eventually, the building's landlady, Donna Tompkins, was called in to do something about the infestation. She spoke to each of the residents about their experience. They reported the strange noises, the mysterious bugs, and even a funny smell they'd sometimes catch in the hall. A smell like someone had thrown up. And every single person that Donna spoke to couldn't help but remark that the smell was particularly strong outside the apartment of a certain resident, Bill Parham. Stranger still was the fact that Bill hadn't been seen in days. Donna knocked on his door, but received no answer. She called him on his cell phone and could hear the phone ringing inside the apartment, but it just went to voicemail. When she checked the security footage of the lobby, she saw that Bill hadn't left the building in the last few days either. Donna called the police, worried that Bill might be sick or even dead inside his apartment. It was strange, given that he was only in his 30s and didn't seem to have any health conditions. But stranger things had happened. Much stranger things were about to happen too. 2 police officers arrived not long after. They called through the door one more time, and when they got no response, Donna gave them the key to head inside. The apartment was a wreck. All the furniture was covered in dust. Filthy dishes were piled high in the sink and on the draining board. The smell of rot was thick in the air. There were empty boxes of painkillers, all the pills popped from their silvery foil laying on the ground. But worst of all were the bugs. The apartment was crawling with them, and they were on every surface. Those silvery gray earwigs. Neither of the officers liked bugs, and it seemed like the deeper they got into the apartment, the more bugs there were. Some even seemed to be crawling towards them, pointing their pinchers at them as though they were defending their territory. This looked to be a textbook case of what happens when a resident keels over and dies. But there was just one problem. Where was the body? Bill Parham had seemingly dropped off the face of the earth, and now a colony of mysterious bugs had started squatting in his apartment in his absence. Then came that smell again, that truly awful smell, like bile and blood. It was even stronger now, and it seemed like it was coming from a nearby closet. The 2 officers, acting on pure instinct, drew their weapons and approached the closet with caution. Even if they weren't consciously aware of it, they knew they were going to find something awful inside. Something evil. Something dangerous. When they threw open the closet door, they couldn't help but scream. They'd found the nest. It was a huge round hive, like the biggest beehive you've ever seen, melded into the lower corner of the closet. The unnatural earwigs were crawling into, out of, and around it. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands of them. And the second they registered the presence of the 2 officers, intruders into their nest, they began to swarm. In sheer panic, both raised their guns and opened fire into the closet, but it didn't do them any good. Their bullets just pierced and splintered the hive, causing even more enraged insects to spill out and begin crawling over the 2 cops. They fled from the apartment, screaming in pain from the gnashing pincers of the insects crawling all over their skin. They never did find the corpse of Bill Parham, but that's because Bill Parham wasn't dead, at least not until mere moments ago, when the bullets from the cops' gun had torn through his bones and perforated his organs. He died not long after, and if he could still speak close to the end, he would have thanked them both for the mercy, because the monstrosity that they'd just encountered in the closet wasn't just a nest of mysterious insects in Bill Parham's apartment. It was Bill himself. This is the fate worse than death in store for anyone supremely unlucky enough to fall victim to SCP-439, better known by the nickname for their unique nests, the Bone Hive. And while these nasty little critters may be small, they're filled with enough pure nightmare fuel to send you running into 682's containment chamber for a little comfort. Let's go through this whole nightmarish process and tell you exactly what happened to poor Bill Parham. First discovered by the SCP Foundation in mainland China, SCP-439 specimens largely get by on the fact that they're not much to look at. Unless you're an entomologist, when you see a strange insect, you probably just accept the fact that it's a perfectly normal breed you've just never encountered before. Nobody is hammering down the doors of their local news station to alert the press about the gray earwig they saw crawling out of a crack in their bathroom wall. But if Bill Parham had done just that, it would have saved his life. The Foundation would have immediately flagged the incident as an SCP-439 infestation and dispatched a mobile task force to deal with it. Instead, when Bill saw the earwig for the first time, he was getting ready for work and didn't have the time to stop and deal with it. He made a mental note to buy some bug killer on the way home, but quickly forgot. The insect didn't forget him though. In fact, it thought he would be a perfect candidate for the SCP-439 process. The Foundation has tested extensively with the one SCP-439 sample they'd been able to successfully catch and contain. In all tests, they found that 439 specimens rejected hosts from any species other than humans. They're an extraordinarily specific parasite. It's also only one particular type of SCP-439 specimen that you actually need to worry about: the queens. Despite their superficial similarities, SCP-439 behave nothing like non-anomalous earwigs. Normal earwigs are not social creatures. They're solitary scavengers and they don't keep nests as permanent habitats. The same can definitely not be said for SCP-439. They have complex social structures, much like that of bees, ants, and termites, with queens, scouts, workers, and warriors. If you happen to encounter a worker or a warrior, you may get a painful pinch from their pinchers if you get too close. But if you end up on the wrong side of one of the queens, then you have a much worse fate in store for you. And it just so happened that the SCP-439 specimen that appeared in Bill Parham's bathroom that morning was visiting royalty. This 439 queen had selected her target, and now it was time to move to the next part of the process: initial infiltration. When Bill returned home from work, he was delighted to find that the gray earwig was nowhere to be seen, but that didn't mean it was gone. It was still there lurking. It just didn't want to be seen. After all, the real fun would happen after Bill went to bed. Once SCP-439 detects that its potential host has fallen into a deep sleep, it will crawl onto the person's body and into their mouth, which is exactly what it did to Bill. It feels like little more than a tickle in your throat, and you will have no idea that the tiny creature crawling down your windpipe and into the soft, warm tissue of your lungs spells your doom. Very few people wake up during this process, but even if they did, there's virtually nothing they could do. When Bill woke up, he was suffering from mild chest pains and shortness of breath, a symptom not uncommon in a number of respiratory ailments. He had no idea that the SCP-439 queen was already inside him. He got up and went about his day, trying to ignore the pain as it gradually grew worse and worse, feeling almost like something was moving inside his chest. He spent the whole day having to stop to let out a deep, hacking cough, but coughing didn't expel or change anything. He looked and felt so terrible that his boss let him go home early, hoping that Bill would be able to sleep off whatever illness he thought he had picked up. But over the next couple of days, his condition only worsened. The pain grew so excruciating he could barely move, and he was popping painkillers like Tic Tacs to no effect. He started running a dangerously high fever, his body trying in vain to fight back against its lethal intruder. He felt worse than he ever had in his life, but little did poor Bill know, the most terrible parts of the process were yet to come. Through anomalous means, an SCP-439 infection is able to induce fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP, in its victims, which is typically a genetic disease that presents itself before the victim turns 10 years old. The condition is infamous for its primary symptom, turning muscle and other soft tissue into bone, slowly but surely paralyzing the victim and putting them into a state of unspeakable pain. This bone transformation process is known as ossification, and Bill was about to experience it firsthand. His pain increased as his mobility decreased, with more of his flesh becoming solid lumps of bone underneath the skin. Soon enough, all he knew was pain. It became so agonizing that he was delirious with it. He was drunk on pain. Even perceiving sunlight felt like being stabbed in the eyes. That's why, like all the other victims of SCP-439, he decided to conceal himself in a warm, dark place where no light could get to him. In Bill's case, of course, that place was his closet. He was hurting so bad that all he could do was curl up into the fetal position and weep as his muscles turned to bone and his body began to compact and shrink. He didn't even look like a human anymore. He was more like a ball, covered in a bone shell and filled with warm organs. That's when the queen started laying eggs among his organs. It wasn't long before there was a new brood of around 30,000 specimens living inside Bill's body. He was still very much alive, but there wasn't anything he could do about his situation. His muscles had long since turned to bone, and they had eaten large portions of his brain, leaving mainly the parts needed to keep his organs just barely functioning. After all, the colony still needs central heating. SCP-439 colonies have developed a perfect parasitic relationship with the human body. They even use the stomach inside the hive to pre-digest food into a liquid slurry that's easier for them to consume. The only loser in this situation is someone like Bill. who is forced to become the new home for the world's most nightmarish freeloaders. Eventually, when the colony becomes too big, a queen departs to start a new one, and the process repeats itself once more. It's enough to make you want to sleep with your mouth closed for the rest of your life. Oh, and we haven't even told you the worst part yet. Foundation scientists have conducted tests on some victims of SCP-439 and found that while the creatures do consume large parts of the brain, the parts they leave are capable of consciousness. That's right. Their victims remain aware of what's happening to them the whole time, even when they hardly seem human at all anymore. What actually finally kills the victims of SCP-439 isn't the bodily trauma. It's the starvation that sets in when the colony inevitably moves on. Did we just hear you cough? You might want to go get that checked out. All is quiet at the facility, where SCP-1027 floats in its containment chamber. The SCP does not seem to react as a guard opens the door to its room. The agent gropes for the light switch. He is new to the SCP Foundation, and this is his first night working on his own. Harsh fluorescent light fills the room. The guard lets out a yelp when he sees SCP-1027 for the first time. Unable to control his curiosity, the guard approaches the containment chamber. SCP-1027 looks like a human nervous system that has been extracted from its body. The brain, eyes, and connected nerves are all exposed, as if some mad doctor perfectly dissected a human. SCP-1027 does not move. Gross, the guard thinks, as he taps on the glass casing with his rifle. He jumps back slightly in surprise. It seemed as if the eyeball had twitched slightly to look at him. So creepy, the guard says out loud. He turns around to exit the room. As he approaches the door, the lights flicker. He begins to walk a little quicker. Suddenly, the lights go out completely, plunging the room into darkness. A moment later, the hum of the fluorescence resumes as the lights come back to life. The guard slowly pivots to look at the containment chamber. SCP-1027 still floats motionless in its saline solution. The guard sighs and chuckles to himself for getting spooked. He turns and walks out of the room, closing the door behind him. He makes it a few steps down the hallway before stopping. The guard smacks his forehead with the palm of his hand. "I forgot to turn off the damn light," he says. He heads back to the room SCP-1027 is contained in. He reaches his hand out to grab the doorknob. It is warm to the touch. The guard turns it and pushes the door open. A scream gets caught in his throat, and only a slight wheeze escapes his lungs. Standing in front of him is SCP-1027. The nervous system seems to pulsate as it reaches its arms out towards the guard, who is paralyzed with fear. The guard feels a slight twinge in his ear as a series of nerves enter his auditory canal. Then he hears a voice inside of his head. It's his own voice, and it's telling him to escape his body. The next morning, SCP agents and scientists return to the site for another day's work. One scientist is surprised to find the door to SCP-1027's room wide open. He steps in and looks around. SCP-1027 floats motionless inside of its saline containment chamber. The scientist shrugs, turns off the light, and closes the door. Later that day, a feeding team enters SCP-1027's room, pushing a cart with a brain of a cow on top of it. The 3 members of the group are wearing Level 4 bioprotective equipment. They enter the room and secure the door behind them. One of the men walks over to the containment chamber and pushes a few buttons. As the liquid in the tube slowly begins to drain, SCP-1027 drops down into a laying position on the examination table below it. When the water is completely gone, the glass tube hisses open. A moment later, SCP-1027 sits up. It looks about the room with its exposed eyeballs. Its nerves wriggle like tiny worms as they sense the world around them. SCP-1027 rotates its body so it's sitting with its legs over the side of the table. The feeding team tries to remain calm, but seeing a nervous system move without an actual body is a bit disconcerting to say the least. Researchers found that SCP-1027 was able to survive without the protective casing of muscles and skin because each nerve cell is surrounded by myelin sheathing 300 times thicker than that of normal human cells. The SCP slowly slides off the table and proceeds towards the cow brain that has been placed in the middle of the room. The feeding team backs as far away from the SCP as possible until their bodies are pressed up against the wall. SCP researchers told them that the containment suits would protect them from 1027, but these same researchers have been wrong before. SCP-1027 stands next to the cow brain and looks down at it. Normally at this point, SCP-1027 would extend its nerves and wrap them around the bovine brain. There would be a slight pulsing, and the brain would begin to denature. It is still unclear if SCP-1027 consumes the actual brain matter, or just feeds on the residual chemical energy that resides in the tissue. The feeding team carries out this procedure once a week, which seems to keep SCP-1027 happy. But this time, SCP-1027 just stares at the brain, as if it is contemplating whether it is worth eating. It is almost as if SCP-1027 isn't hungry, as if it has already eaten. But the team knows that's crazy, as they are the only ones who feed this SCP, and it has been exactly a week since its previous meal. The feeding team turn their heads to look at one another through the clear face shields in their suits. One of the men shrugs as they all turn back to watch what SCP-1027 does next. The SCP lifts its head so that its eyes are looking straight at the feeding team. One of the members reaches behind him, searching for the doorknob. Then SCP-1027 slowly turns around and walks back towards the table. It lays down and goes still.
"Someone needs to lock it back in its containment chamber,"
one of the men says.
"Well, that's Jerry's job,"
responds another as he pushes the man next to him towards where SCP-1027 is laying.
"All right, fine, I'll do it. But if that thing eats me and turns me into an SCP, you two will be the first people I go after."
Jerry walks slowly towards the containment chamber. He stretches his arm as far as it will go to keep as much distance as possible between his body and SCP-1027. Jerry pushes a big red button, and the glass tube hisses close. The containment chamber fills with saline water, and SCP-1027 is once again suspended in the liquid-filled tube. The research team grabs the cart with the cow brain on it and rushes out of the room, slamming the door behind them. They inform the head of the facility of the odd behavior SCP-1027 had exhibited, but he is a busy man and shrugs it off as just an anomaly. "It'll eat when it's hungry enough, give it a week and then try again," the facility commander tells the men. The feeding team walks silently down the hall to the decontamination room, where they will take off their suits and shower as a precaution to prevent the spread of any foreign agents. The peculiar behavior of SCP-1027 lingers in their minds. They enter the room and begin to joke with one another to ease their nerves. This makes them feel better. It is silly to worry about SCP-1027 now that it is safely contained in its chamber once again. They turn the shower heads on and steam slowly fills the room. "I might call out sick next week just to be safe. That SCP is going to be really hungry after missing its meal this week, and I don't want to become a snack," one of the men says as he scrubs his body. "Yeah, that's not a bad idea," responds Jerry. "Who knows what the creepy thing will do if it ever gets out of its containment chamber? Maybe it'll eat our brains. Although there wouldn't be much to eat in your case, Bob," he says, pointing to his teammate. The whole team laughs as the room continues to fill with steam. Jerry's smile slowly fades as he feels something tickle his ear. He uses his hand to brush whatever it was away, but the sensation comes back. Jerry washes the soap from his face and turns around. All he can see is steam. "Hey, you guys, stop messing around," Jerry yells. "What are you talking about, Jerry?" one of the other members of the team asks. Jerry sees the steam move directly in front of him. He rubs his eyes to help him focus through the moisture. When he takes his hands away, an instance of SCP-1027 is standing directly in front of him. He is staring straight into the eyeballs of the nervous system of the guard who had entered SCP-1027's room the previous night. "What the?" But before Jerry can finish his sentence, the instance of SCP-1027 shoves its nerves down Jerry's throat, silencing his voice. It then sticks the nerves of its hand into Jerry's ear. The SCP-1027 instance feels around in Jerry's head until it locates the part of the brain it is looking for and connects to it. Jerry's brain is flooded with dopamine, and chemical signals are transferred from the SCP-1027 instance directly into its victim's brain. Jerry's nervous system now wants to break free of the flesh casing that contains it. "Jerry, you okay over there?" asks Bob. "You've gone, kinda quiet." But there is no response. Jerry's nervous system moves his body towards one of the shower knobs and turns the hot water on full blast. It's hoping that if the water is hot enough, it will scald the skin and muscle tissue, making it easier to remove from the body. "Jerry?" the other team member says. Suddenly, the steam shifts, and the SCP-1027 instance is standing in the middle of the shower room. The remaining members of the feeding team scream in horror. They try to escape but slip on the wet shower floor. SCP-1027 slowly approaches them with its nerves outstretched. The echoing shouts from the feeding team are muffled as a series of nerves enter their bodies. The day continues at the SCP site as if everything was normal. Agents are debriefed on previous missions, scientists experiment on different SCPs, and administrators meet to plan the next acquisition. The sun begins to set and people start to leave for the day. All is quiet that night, as a new security guard makes his rounds. The guard that the administrator of the facility had just hired disappeared without a trace the night before. His disappearance was chalked up to nerves and being too scared to return to work. The new guard checks each room to make sure everything is secure. He approaches the room that contains SCP-1027. He opens the door, flicks on the light, and looks at the SCP floating in its containment tube. "Gross," the guard says out loud. He flicks off the light and continues his rounds. Near the far part of the hallway, the door to the decontamination room is slightly ajar. The guard approaches and pushes it open with his nightstick. He takes one step into the darkness and feels the wall for the light switch. He turns the lights on. There is nothing but a wet floor. The guard shrugs and turns off the lights. He walks through the doorway. As he steps back into the hallway, he is greeted by 4 instances of SCP-1027. The guard opens his mouth to scream as the nervous systems reach out their tendrils and plunge them into his ears, nose, and mouth. The SCP Foundation has a long history of experience with humanoid anomalies, from simple reality benders like SCP-239 to strange transplants from other universes like SCP-2273. But one of the oldest, strangest, and most lethal humanoid anomalies in the Foundation's considerable cabinet isn't a superhuman or a soldier. It is a man known only as Herr Chirurg. On first glance, SCP-542's containment protocol is seemingly standard. He is allowed to request personal items and furniture for his cell, so long as they are blunt and cannot be used to cut skin. Reasonable enough, and many such requests have been granted. The ones denied include nail files, clippers, and a surgery kit which has been set aside for testing only. But continuing, SCP-542 requires some special attention too. A blood transfusion every week on request, and even an organ transplant conducted by Foundation doctors should any of his own organs begin to fail. SCP-542 offers to do the surgery himself, but is repeatedly denied. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, we must look back through time to several years before SCP-542's containment. Over the past 3 years, there have been a violent string of murders across America, England, and Germany. Interpol and the FBI are stumped, not only by the wide range of attacks, anywhere from 45 to 60 murders across 3 countries, but by the brutal nature of the attacks. The victims were found in various states of disassembly, body parts missing and tissue removed. They set up crime scenes and conducted complex investigations, but they were simply unable to find their man. In 1 month, 4 people in Germany were assaulted, with the muscle, tissue, and bone removed from all of their limbs. 3 of them died from their injuries before help could arrive, and the 4th was an American woman staying at a shady German hotel. The only reason she narrowly survived the horrific attack was because of the actions of her neighbor, a Foundation agent passing through town. He heard sounds of fighting in the room next door at 3 in the morning and broke down the door to help, unaware of the horrific scene he would find. A huge, misshapen man best described as a Frankenstein's monster. His skin was a patchwork of different shades stitched and grafted together. His chest was sunken in, his arms were grotesquely long for his body, and his face was skeletal and gaunt. This creature, that would come to be named SCP-542, was hunched over the fully conscious woman, vivisecting her leg to remove the sinew and bone. In shock, the agent pulled his weapon and fired at the creature, which escaped through the window unharmed. The authorities were called, and the woman survived, although without her right leg. Just before being amnesticized, the woman provided a statement to the Foundation. She had been staying in Germany for a few days when she saw a strange man on her usual bus one day. Even though it was summer, The man was draped and wrapped in layers of heavy coats, jackets, and a hat. Though his face completely obscured, the woman could tell he was staring at her from the back of the bus. Thinking it was just some creep, she ignored him and got off at her stop. For 3 days, she continued to take the bus and ignore the strange man sitting in the back. Then, on the 4th day, when she got off the bus that night and went to her hotel room, she found the window open and the lights off, and assumed she had been burglarized. But as soon as she opened the door, she realized she wasn't alone. 2 freakishly long arms with disjointed hands grabbed her ankles from under the bed and brought her crashing to the floor. Before she knew what was happening, she was tied to the bed and the hulking hunchback was retrieving a surgical set and sharpening his knives and tools. Fearing the worst, she began to scream and the agent heard her. But by the time he broke in and shot his weapon, the creature had already done too much damage to her leg. The victim was anesthetized and told her leg had been amputated in a car crash. The Foundation took over the investigation from Interpol, realizing this wasn't some regular serial killer. This was a creature, a predator, and to find it, they had to hunt SCP-542 like a predator. After a long tracking and manhunt across Europe, SCP-542 was brought into Foundation custody, and research into this creature could begin. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, the researchers were expecting an animal or a monster, something they could study and dissect, which is why they were so shocked when the monster began speaking in tongues, German, French, Polish, before settling on English, all in a sharp German accent. The beast was introducing itself, Herr Chirurg, German for Mr. Surgeon. Preliminary investigations revealing much about SCP-542 and confirmed the agent's initial impression was correct. Herr Chirurg is a modern Frankenstein's monster. His anatomy has been warped and malformed, as the agent observed. His skin is a patchwork of large chunks of skin grafted or sewn to each other, no 2 of which seem to come from the same person. His ribcage is warped and twisted, with all the ribs jutting out in different directions, and both his arms are different sizes, though both are incredibly muscular and far too long for his body. Attached to each is a hand, but filled with far more joints than any normal hand, allowing him to bend his fingers in almost any direction. His spine is hunched and twisted like a snake, and the skin stretched tight over his skull reveals a sunken cranium and a mouth with far, far too many teeth, none of them from the same source, and not all of them human. And these are all simply the externally obvious and most grotesque modifications. Foundation staff have conducted intense medical research, ranging from X-rays to comprehensive DNA testing. SCP-542's bone and muscle structures are asymmetrical, revealing the left and right sides of his body come from different sources. In fact, they reveal that almost all of his organs and body parts have been replaced with other body parts from different sources. His DNA is heavily fragmented beyond all logic. By any reasonable measure, SCP-542 should have died a long time ago. Instead, he is able to accept many blood types and organ transplants without so much as discomfort, much less the serious autoimmune response that any normal person would get. Not to mention, he is able to stay perfectly aware even while performing complex brain surgery on himself. Herr Chirurg's history is as enigmatic and mysterious as the question of how he remains alive. He claims he was once a simple doctor from Germany, dreadfully normal until the Great War began. The Foundation has deduced this to mean that he began his modifications to his body between the world wars. But it appears Herr Chirurg wasn't just a monster on the outside. He claims to have worked for the Nazis in World War II as they conducted brutal human experimentation, which he described as boring. The exact nature and timeline of how he modified himself without dying at some point is similarly mysterious. He professes that he didn't work alone. For more complex surgeries, such as implanting his second heart or replacing parts of his spinal cord, he had a team of helpers. Who and where these surgical assistants are now is a mystery. if they're even alive. After all, the Foundation has ample evidence Herr Chirurg is able and willing to kill people for their parts. After all this exhaustive research on SCP-542, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he is some kind of mad scientist, driven insane by his experimentation on his own body. While no one can answer why Chirurg kills except himself, he is almost frighteningly sane. This hulking monstrosity enjoys reading his anatomy textbooks, which he requests on a regular basis, along with filling out crossword puzzles in German. He's friendly too, described as surprisingly pleasant by the research team. He holds long, intellectual conversations on topics ranging from science and biology and medicine to politics and history, which he seems to recount with startling accuracy. In fact, tissue testing has failed to return a definitive age for the surgeon. He's incredibly skilled at the game of chess, and the research team is allowed to play with him as a method of interview. SCP-542 displays fluency in a variety of European languages, though he prefers his supposedly native German. At first, the research team was enthused with his presence, even if he was a little terrifying. Having a brilliant doctor to converse with was a great distraction for them. His ability to heal from intense surgery with almost no organ rejection or allergic reactions was considered a medical miracle. And rather than locking him up and throwing away the key, the research team decided to use him to try and harness this incredible power for modern medicine. His books and notes captured along with him reveal surgical techniques and methods far more advanced than considered possible when they were written. For his part, SCP-542 was happy to comply. He enjoyed performing surgery on himself with an audience, using himself as a living cadaver to explain his manner of surgery and the functions of the body. Unfortunately, observing him this close carried a risk none of the researchers realized until it was too late. You see, Herr Chirurg isn't just a friendly old surgeon. His body runs off second-hand parts and is constantly failing. Organs stop functioning, blood flow ceases. Parts of his body grow gangrenous and necrotic. SCP-542 is able to anomalously detect when this is happening. He is perfectly and acutely aware of his own bodily functions like digestion and peristalsis, and he knows exactly when one of his organs is starting to give up or his flesh is beginning to decay. When this happens, the surgeon undergoes a drastic transformation. His pleasant exterior evaporates. He grows moody and withdrawn, snapping at people and avoiding conversation. He spends long periods of time observing people, using his ability to sense how well their body is. And then when he senses an opening, he strikes. Just like his murders in Europe, he picks the body of his victims clean of their body parts he needs and lets them die of blood loss. Then he performs the surgery to replace his own failing organs with the new ones, and returns to his usual demeanor. This monstrous Jekyll-Hyde relationship isn't purely need-based either. The research team has discovered that Herr Chirurg will also dissect people simply for the joy of the act. In one regrettable incident, a sewing kit was left behind in this cell. Several hours later, guards discovered a D-class sewn to the mattress in SCP-542's cell, with the surgeon carefully and gleefully extracting his organs. SCP-542 Herr Chirurg is a walking encyclopedia of medical and surgical knowledge, but all that knowledge comes from experimentation on himself and on unwilling victims. The Foundation has put him to use in certain projects, but all activity with him is to be strictly monitored and regulated. Despite appearances, SCP-542 isn't a person. He is a predator, and an exceptionally skilled and dangerous one at that. One moment of inattentiveness can result in a fate much worse than death around him. But you can rest assured that if something does happen, your parts won't go to waste. In a remote part of Russia, a mysterious disease outbreak was tearing through a tiny farming village with terrifying side effects. There was no cure, no clue to where it came from, and worst of all, the disease's terrifying impact didn't end with death. No, it was after those carrying the disease died that the real horrors started. After an agonizing fever that leaves the victims writhing in pain, they quickly succumb to the disease, only to rise from their graves to wreak havoc on the living. The virus continues to spread until the corpses outnumber those trying to hide from them, as the world spirals into almost certain ruin. It sounds like the plot of a zombie movie, but for the SCP Foundation, this is anything but fiction. And the terror that unfolded in that little Siberian town is the first recorded encounter with SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates. First, livestock began to vanish from farms. Theft or wild animals were suspected, but no suspects could be found, and no mutilated remains turned up. The animals weren't being stolen, and they weren't being eaten, so what happened to them? With no more animals left to lose, the farmers themselves then began to disappear. But the authorities refused to take the missing persons cases seriously. The missing farmers' families would contact the police, make a report, and then the whole thing was forgotten. It was written off just as another unsolved disappearance, which wasn't uncommon in the wild and unforgiving region. Then, the police themselves began to disappear. The families of the missing farmers would sometimes report strange sounds from the surrounding woods, describing moans and inhuman screeches of pain. One young boy reported seeing a cow with what he described as tentacles lurking around the edge of the trees. Regional police were dispatched to the location and ordered to investigate and report back on their findings within 24 hours. But the units sent to the area didn't report back and were never heard from again. Upon learning of the reports, the Russian government grew increasingly concerned, fearing domestic insurgency or foreign espionage of some kind could be at play. They sent a small team of special agents to the area, and one by one, those agents disappeared, just like the others before them. It seemed no one who went into the village after the disappearances started ever came out again. They had all simply vanished. Desperate for answers, the Russian government contacted the only people in the world who could help: the SCP Foundation. What the Foundation found over the course of their investigation would shock and unnerve them, going beyond anything they had previously discovered. Before the investigation officially began, the affected area was sealed off by the Russian government. Not knowing if it would be safe to send researchers into the containment perimeter, the Foundation set up a small camera-mounted unit, nicknamed Herbie, to capture footage of whatever remained of the village. The images captured by Herbie revealed what exactly had become of the people in this doomed village, and the true nightmarish nature of SCP-610. SCP-610 is a Keter-class entity, meaning it's an anomaly that's exceedingly difficult to contain consistently or reliably, with containment procedures often being extensive and complex. 610 is a highly contagious skin disease that initially manifests like an ordinary allergic reaction, with symptoms including increased sensitivity, itching, and a rash. But within just 3 hours of those initial symptoms appearing, the rash starts to turn into masses of scar tissue on the chest and arms. These masses spread over the legs and back of the victim and completely consume them in thick, rubbery flesh within 5 hours. Once they're covered, the victim will cease all vital functions. Unfortunately for them, and doubly so for those around them, they do not stay dead. About 3 minutes after expiring, the victim's vitals will restart at a heightened rate, and the masses of flesh encasing their body will begin to move and multiply, mutating them into a form beyond anything resembling the human they once were. The specific type of mutation varies from case to case, but has included the head becoming massive and bulbous, the growth of extra limbs, and, in especially gruesome cases, the victim's body splitting apart to allow extra tendrils of flesh to sprout from the open wound. Occasionally, an infected person will stop moving and become rooted to the ground in a set location. Once it is settled, their flesh will spread itself across the ground, encasing all nearby objects in flaps of scar tissue. The infected that maintain their mobility are highly aggressive, even violent, and will attempt to infect any living thing that comes into their line of sight. The disease does not only infect humans, and can take over any living organism within a matter of hours. Due to the highly contagious and dangerous nature of the disease, safe observation of infected specimens and areas is only possible with drones and mounted cameras. This brings us back to Herbie, the first such mounted camera to record footage of the infected area. Herbie was deployed to an infection site, also known as Site A, without any damage. It remained at the outside perimeter of the village for 2 hours, observing several infected humans and fire damage to many of the homes, before following an infected into an intact house. Herbie's camera feed captured the infected person entering the house and sitting down at the table inside. There were several other infected humans in the house, and one unidentified infected creature that remained immobile under the table. After viciously assaulting one of the other infected humans, the infected returned to the table and began to lay out plates on top of it. Pieces of its flesh began to wriggle and tear away from its body before settling onto each plate. Once the plates were filled, the infected sitting at the table began to grab at the flesh and crush it into their mouths, in a perverse imitation of a normal mealtime gathering. After capturing this stomach-churning display, Herbie left the house and continued to explore the village. It recorded footage of a large stack of bodies that seemed to be made up of both Russian military and civilians, with an infected sitting on top. As Herbie maneuvered towards the remains of the town hall, an infected grabbed the rover off the ground. Herbie's camera was able to capture the face of the infected that grabbed the rover. The face was that of a young girl around 10 years old, strangely intact atop a large, distorted body. The final moments of Herbie's camera feed captured the infected girl's face bursting open, revealing tendrils of flesh that pulled Herbie into the gaping maw. Then, the feed cut to black. Herbie was regarded as lost, but the video feed briefly resumed 5 hours later, showing the camera covered with an unidentified slime. After this, the video feed was cut for good, and Herbie abandoned in Site A. The Foundation has sent several manned expeditions into Site A, where many expedition forces have fallen victim to the infected. Several operatives were also lost in an earthquake that revealed a network of underground tunnels. A manned expedition into these tunnels was attempted, and the video feed that was captured by the researchers on the expedition was deeply disturbing. There were images of an abandoned church filled with infected, and a mass of uninfected or partially infected human captives. The final moments of the video feed from this expedition captured several operatives being murdered by an infected human wielding a farming scythe, indicating that the infected are capable of using simple weaponry in addition to brute force. The use of this weapon, paired with the presence of captives in the underground tunnels, paints a terrifying picture of the kind of organization the infected are capable of. No more manned expeditions have been attempted, or if they have been highly classified. Ordinarily, once a new SCP is discovered, it is placed in containment at the Foundation, with special procedures in place so that it can be studied or even neutralized in the rare occasions where it's deemed necessary. When it comes to SCP-610 though, containment might just be impossible. It simply covers too much area and is too dangerous to expose to human researchers. Instead, all infected areas have been isolated with the permission of the Russian government. There is an official perimeter established around these areas, and any civilians that approach them are told to leave under the pretense of ongoing military operations. For once, a top-secret military project is the more innocent answer. Armed guards are placed at the perimeter of every infected area, and any living thing with symptoms of SCP-610 spotted near the perimeter is to be immobilized, killed, and burned from as far away as possible. Any living thing that comes in contact with SCP-610, whether a soldier, a scientist, or a civilian, is immediately terminated and their remains destroyed. If someone comes within 3 meters of an infected organism, they will be quarantined and remotely examined to determine if they have been infected. While the spread of SCP-610 can be airborne, it has been determined to be far less contagious when spread through air particles as opposed to physical contact. The infection sites remain active to this day, like modern-day leper colonies, though they are isolated from the general population, and the military is doing everything in their power to contain the infected. SCP-610 is still very much alive. It is rare for an entity to exist that the Foundation cannot truly contain, but can only try to guard against, and that makes this infection all the more terrifying. Who knows how much it has mutated over the years, growing, spreading, hungry for new hosts. There is still so much that the Foundation does not know about the flesh that hates, such as how it works, what it can do, or even where it came from, since the origin of the first infection is still, at this point, entirely unknown. It has shown itself to be capable of learning, planning, and protecting itself, so who is to say that it couldn't figure out a way to escape from its isolated area? It is so highly contagious and spreads so quickly that just one tiny infected rabbit and one inattentive soldier could be enough for SCP-610 to reach the general population. If it did, its violent, destructive nature and hatred for all life would mean that everything, not just the people, but animals, plants, and the world itself, could be at risk. And no one is ready for this kind of infection. a disease that turns the human body against itself, turns our skin into a weapon and a tomb, stripping away identity, humanity, and everything that isn't made of the same hateful flesh. So let's hope that the perimeter holds. And the next time you feel a little itchy, try not to think about what might happen next. Gunshots ring out in the walls of the tenements, the same walls now stained with blood, the stains swimming with tiny moving particulates. Officer Cronenberg runs down the long, echoing stairwell, clutching his nauseated gut, terrified of the things chasing him. Because that's what they are. Not humans, but things. He looks up when he hears the shuffling and sees the shadows moving against the walls. Oh no, they're coming. He pulls his pistol out of the holster and clutches it tight with one trembling hand, caked in dried blood. He'll go out shooting. He won't let those monsters take him. He'll let them kill him before they get a chance to take him. In running down the stairs to get away from the monsters pursuing him, he'd somehow never anticipated that they'd be waiting below him too. But that's exactly the case. He sees the double doors at the bottom of the stairs burst open and more terrible shapes spill in at the bottom of the stairwell. He's surrounded on all sides. It feels like death itself is closing in. But don't worry, dear viewer. He's not going to die. Something so much worse is going to happen to him. Let's rewind the clock a few hours. It's a quiet night when Officer Cronenberg receives the call. He's prowling the city in his patrol car, shining light on all the little nooks and crannies of the concrete jungle, when his radio crackles to life. The dispatcher crowing orders about unusual activity reported in some crumbling old tenement a few blocks away from him. Officer Cronenberg rolls his eyes. Probably drug addicts or two-bit wannabe gangsters. They would scatter like insects underneath an upturned rock as soon as he arrives. That much he's sure of. And of course, one part of that thought was true. Just not the part he ever would have expected. He arrives outside the tenement not long after. It was one of the city's many overpriced red brick husks, the ghosts of buildings tattooed in graffiti, ruled by slumlords and populated by the desperate and the dying, the elderly, smackheads, petty criminals, honest families experiencing a temporary run of bad luck that turned out to be not so temporary. The whole place stinks of trash, black mold, and human misery. But as a rough and tumble beat cop, that's his bread and butter. Officer Cronenberg thinks he's seen it all. He's seen men murdered over less money than you'd think to spend on an evening at the movies. He'd seen people exploited and mistreated. Horrible things done by one human being to another for no good reason. Money, hate, respect, whatever. With all this in mind, he doesn't expect to see anything in the building that he hasn't seen before. However, in this case, he's horribly wrong. When he steps into the building, he's greeted by an empty lobby with 2 broken elevators and nobody at the front desk. The lights are dim and flickering. The tiles on the ground are cracked. It's about what he expected. He approaches the desk in hopes of getting some indication of who called in the complaint. Dispatch hadn't actually specified which apartment reported the activity in the first place, but he doesn't find answers to that. Instead, he finds a faded pamphlet printed on cheap paper. The largest font reads, "Order of Theseus, a new way of living." Some kind of church group, he wonders? Morbid curiosity, mixed with investigative instincts, encourages him to read on to the only paragraph on the pamphlet that's still legible. It reads, "Are you stuck in a rut? Tired of waking up as the same old you every day? Do you feel lonely? Is life just passing you by? Don't fret. We know how you feel. With Theseus, you can change all of that. Become a community that truly cares. Become a new you. Meetings are held every Thursday at apartment 1408 on floor 8. We can't wait to add you to our special family." This rings alarm bells for Officer Cronenberg. It sounds like some kind of New Age cult. Manson family, David Koresh, Heaven's Gate vibes all around. Definitely the kind of thing that warrants further investigation. Almost instinctively, he places his hand to the butt of his service pistol, holstered at his hip, as though to check that it's still there, then heads for the stairs. He knows exactly where he's going. Apartment 1408 on floor 8. Maybe he'll find some answers to the nature of the disturbance up there. After several flights of stairs, he's walking down the long hallway towards the offending door. He's just gonna ask a few questions. He won't start anything unless they start something. They'll respect the badge, or they'll respect the gun. All these comforting platitudes flood his brain as he reaches out and knocks on the door. It swings open, revealing a dark room. How strange for a person in an apartment block like this to leave their door unlocked in the middle of the night. That, to him, is enough probable cause to investigate. He steps inside, clicking on his flashlight to peer through the gloom. The room is a hovel, trash strewn everywhere, interspersed with candles and other strange, almost religious knickknacks. There are posters on the wall, scrawly and handmade, all bearing the words of the so-called Order of Theseus. He's unnerved, but also invigorated. A cult? Maybe if he bursts this open, he'll get promoted to detective. His fantasies of promotion, of a rise to prominence on the force, are cut short when his beam falls upon a human figure standing in the corner of the room, grinning in the dark. Without a second's hesitation, Officer Cronenberg draws his pistol with a trembling hand and points it at the lurker in the dark. He orders them to freeze.
"There is no need for violence, officer," the lurker says. "It is a joyful day. You're about to become a part of something so wonderful."
The lurker raises his arms. At first, Officer Cronenberg thinks he's holding a strange weapon in one of his hands, some kind of twisted black knife. But no, he's not holding a weapon. That's his arm. It's long and gnarled, with too many joints, covered in a thick, chitinous shell. Not a person's arm, the arm of some giant insect. When the lurker takes a step forward, Officer Cronenberg can't contain himself. He levels the pistol and damn near empties the clip into the lurker, causing him to crumple to the ground in a heap. But after the ringing of the gunshots fade, there's another sound. Footsteps all around the building. More civilians, Officer Cronenberg assumes, as he suppresses the urge to vomit and stumbles out into the hall. However, in the hall, he doesn't see the assembled crowd of concerned neighbors that he expects. Instead, he sees them, the others. The dirty and disheveled inhabitants of the apartment block, each one with a transfigured limb, that horrible insect appendage. He needs to get out of here. He's surrounded by monsters. Which brings us full circle. Not long after this, he's running for his life down the stairwell, hoping to escape the madness, when more of those insect limb freaks burst through the door in front of him and block his path. It's time to go out shooting, Officer Cronenberg. He can't even keep track of how many rounds are still in his magazine, but he draws a bead on the bugman at the front of the crowd and fires a shot. It's the best of his life, catches the mutant clean in the center of his forehead. And he can't tell if it's real or if he's losing his mind from fear, but he swears that in the darkness of the hole he just blew into the stranger's skull, he can see something moving, like there's something alive in there. Millions of little lives wrapped up into one. He turns without even thinking, anticipating the tide of insect men behind him, but one is standing right there. The man unleashes a wet cough into Officer Cronenberg's face, dooming him to become just like all the others. Despite his valiant efforts, Officer Cronenberg has become infected. None of this is normal, but it is if you're infected by SCP-150, the body-jacking parasite, codenamed the Ship of Theseus. It's a famous thought experiment inspired by the vessel of the ancient Greek demigod of the same name. If you took the Ship of Theseus and over time replaced the mast, the hull, the bow, the oars, and the sails, when all is said and done, when none of the original parts are left, is it still the Ship of Theseus, or something else entirely? Philosophical questions like this are likely to plague the mind of someone infected by the SCP-150 parasites, an anomalous breed of almost microscopic louse, similar in appearance to the infamous tongue-eating Cymothoea exigua. But the degree to which these creatures will alter the body of their host make the tongue-replacing insect look positively quaint by comparison. When the SCP-150 parasites first infest the body, they will incubate and multiply over the course of 7 days, devouring the central systems of the body and laying eggs in all of the victim's blood vessels. Little by little, the interior of the victim is essentially hollowed out and filled with parasites, capable of working conjunctively and seamlessly replacing the body's most vital systems, up to and including the brain and nervous system. Of course, the SCP Foundation is no stranger to parasites, but in many ways, this one is more deceptively effective at its job, thanks to a few different vital biological mechanisms. The victims won't feel pain or discomfort due to the immunosuppressants that prevent their bodies from rejecting the parasites, and the psychological effects of the parasites will prevent them from ever even perceiving their infection as a problem. Transmission is also incredibly easy. The victims will cough, sending out clouds of microscopic eggs that will burrow into the victim's flesh. And after that 7-day incubation period, the new victim will be spreading the eggs too. An almost perfect system. However, you may have keenly spotted one design flaw of the SCP-150 parasite in Officer Cronenberg's experience. The limb nearest to the site of infection will be gradually transformed on a molecular level, giving it the appearance of a freakish insectoid appendage. While the infectee won't see a problem with this, the same definitely cannot be said for the people around them, who will generally react with abject horror upon seeing the transformation. It is your only advance warning sign to get the hell out of there before a cough infects you in the exact same way. Naturally, it eventually came time for the Foundation to perform an autopsy on someone infected with the SCP-150 parasites. The task fell to 3 researchers with a medical specialty: Dr. Harlan Sun, Dr. Wendy Robin, and Dr. Alex Harlow. The subject of their experiments, which had a particular focus on how SCP-150 infection affected brain matter, were 2 members of D-Class personnel, D-13732 and D-016002, who were both intentionally infected and given time for the infection to gestate in their unknowing bodies. After the initial gestation period, D-13732 was euthanized following a neurosurgery that revealed an uncomfortable fact. Their entire nervous system had been replaced by clustered instances of SCP-150. However, all was not lost, as the cluster of parasites that had replaced their brain was stored away safely for the rest of the test. Perhaps the most significant part of the study was the live neurosurgery on D-016002, performed by Drs. Sun, Robin, and Harlow. The D-Class was first given a numbing agent before having their skull caps surgically removed. This revealed again not a brain, but a cluster of SCP-150 sitting in the cranium where the brain should be. The doctors began interviewing their peculiar patient while continuing to monitor brain activity, all in hopes of better understanding how the parasites replaced the functions of the organs they devoured. When the D-Class was asked his name, he responded that it was Mako. He was correct. When Mako was asked to name something to sit in, he said chair. And when asked what colored grass was, he predictably responded green. And when asked the simple sum, what is 1 + 1, after a brief pause, he responded 2. This line of questioning allowed the researchers to identify the parts in the 150 cluster that processed language and communication, so the test proceeded. They removed instances of SCP-150 and placed them in small glass vials, which were separated from the mass and placed across the room for a period of 10 minutes. It was only after each one was removed from the cluster that they stirred into life and began to wriggle. The experiment continued once 100 of the instances had been removed from the pseudo-neural mass. At this point, Dr. Sun repeated the same series of questions to Mako. The responses were the same, except a little slower, accounting for the reduced pseudo-neural mass. This was when the experiment got interesting. 100 samples of SCP-150 from the extracted brain mass of the euthanized D-Class were transplanted into Mako's brain mass to see if the 150 parasites were capable of transferring cognitive abilities across hosts. They were pleased with the results. Upon asking the same set of questions, the answers came at their original speed once again. Except this time, the answers were slightly different. Mako answered with couch instead of chair, blue instead of green, but thankfully still 2 as an answer to 1 + 1. But this wasn't quite ambitious enough for the researchers. If a small portion of 150 parasite tissue was transferred without rejection, did this mean that the same was true on a larger scale? It was a question as compelling as it was frightening, and it inspired them to conduct
their ultimate test, removing the entirety of Mako's brain mass and replacing it with the brain mass of the deceased D-Class. They asked the same questions again, and the answers were different. But the nature of the answers wasn't nearly as interesting as the fundamental change underpinning them. This wasn't Mako, it was Michael. The life and personality of the deceased D-Class had taken over that of Mako. SCP-150 parasite clusters, it seemed, retained the soul, so to speak, of the person who was first infected. Due to the incredibly infectious nature of SCP-150, the SCP Foundation has been forced to take the utmost precautions in keeping them secured, contained, and protected. You've probably already guessed that they've been given the Keter class designation, and Foundation protocol dictates that patients like the ones above are kept in Level 3 biohazard protection containment cells. Separate ones, of course, in order to prevent them from collaborating. SCP-150 parasites outside of host bodies are all kept in vacuum-sealed glass flasks in the Site-42 Infectious Materials Lab. If any samples of SCP-150 are found in the wild, they are to be immediately incinerated as a safety precaution. But in a sense, maybe the Order of Theseus were onto something. These unique parasites are a path to many things: regeneration, universal organ donation, the life of the mind beyond the death of the body. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, being infected wouldn't be so bad. Or maybe that's just the parasites talking.
Despite the fact that it covers the majority of our planet's surface, we know remarkably little about the oceans. While we know how to navigate them and how to send boats from one continent to another, the surface of the water is usually a calm, safe place where all you expect to encounter are other humans and the occasional storm. What's below the surface is another story. Scientists estimate that we've only explored maybe 5% of the world's oceans and what lies in them. On top of that, they estimate that we've only encountered and cataloged 10% of marine life. That means that 95% of the ocean is unexplored and untouched by humans, and that 90% of the ocean species have never even been seen by humans. It makes you think, just what kind of stuff is down there? It could be anything. Even mundane ocean life can be deeply strange and bizarre. There are sharks that live for over 300 years, blind fish that only hunt by smell, jellyfish that are reborn whenever they die. If normal ocean life is this terrifying and explanation-defying, what kinds of anomalies could the oceans we swim and fish in be playing host to? One such anomaly is SCP-835. But before we get started, SCP-835 is an old file. It's one of the earliest in the Foundation's database, in fact. Like many of the Foundation's earliest documents, it's been heavily redacted and expunged, to the point where large blocks of the text are missing, not to mention the fact that it's been locked behind a content filter. But SCP-835 is unique not because it's been expunged and redacted, but because it's had them lifted. Versions of the file and its addendum that are cleared of the redactions have been declassified and released by order of 05-11 to all viewers. For some reason, whatever was so secret about this file no longer applies. But before we take a look at the declassified documentation, let's look at the old version to get an idea of what exactly we're dealing with here. The attached image for SCP-835 is, to put it simply, gross. It's what appears to be some kind of bone or muscular growth underwater, a bit like coral, but much more organic and flesh-like in shape. The growth is mostly white and brown, but large sections are grown over with what looks like some kind of black mold spores. It's large too, almost the size of a person's chest, and seems to continue out of frame. The caption is simply, "Still image from recording 81. It's not even clear if this growth, whatever it is SCP-835 or not. Continuing on to the file, the object class is Keter, and the special containment procedures are lengthier than most articles and very detailed. They explain that SCP-835 must constantly be monitored and checked to see if it's growing or expanding. In the event that it becomes hostile to Foundation personnel, something known only as Suppression Tactic A-A6 is to be activated until it ceases any hostile action. The anomaly has to be contained in the open ocean rather than moved to a water tank or such, because of the highly aggressive response of SCP-835 to confinement for any length of time. So whatever it is, it's alive. It's expanding and growing. and seems capable of knowing when it's being placed into containment and responding angrily. It's not only sentient, it's intelligent and aware. They go on to say that SCP-835's waste has to be immediately collected and contained, and that it is to be fed 2 times every day, though what exactly is going to be fed to it is redacted in this version of the file. It can also be moved to a new location up to 2 times a year, but only if the current location can't support it anymore, and if the move has been approved by the site directors. On top of that, personnel have to stay away from SCP-835, at least 15 feet. They also need to have safety harnesses attached to winches on the boat. If anyone so much as touches SCP-835, all of the winches will activate and rapidly yank all the divers back to the boat. From there, suppression tactic A-A6 is again instituted. But there is another line. If a staff member touches SCP-835 and is captured by it, then the anomaly is to be monitored around the clock until the subject has been released. Very ominous containment procedures. This predator, if it is a predator, has a penchant for consuming people and needs to be avoided at all costs. But if someone is caught, it releases them after a while. The description of the document clears some things up. SCP-835 is a mass of polyps, or tissue growths, that resemble coral. It's huge and heavy, though its full weight is again redacted, and the individual polyps are also huge, over 1 meter long, much longer than any known coral species. The central mass is oval and has a huge 3-meter-long polyp on each side of it, but can't move or budge because of its huge weight. Instead, it uses huge tentacles extending from the polyps to dig into the ground and anchor it in place against the ocean currents. These are the same tentacles that are used for feeding and are covered in a sticky glue-like adhesive. They're not just long and strong either. Tests have recorded them damaging stainless steel plating. And speaking of plating, SCP-835 is covered in it. Not steel, but some kind of organic coral that's much harder than steel and couldn't be broken by even diamond drill bits. All the Foundation could get were small samples, and if that wasn't bad enough, the Foundation's positive that SCP-835 is growing, like the containment procedure suggested, and it's growing fast, up to 50 pounds in a single day if it's left uninterrupted. But it can't be stopped. It reacts to certain chemicals that make it close up like an oyster and stop growing for 24 hours at a time. Based on that, the Foundation's been able to develop and use a chemical cocktail to force it to halt, the aforementioned suppression tactic A-A6. However, the results of testing it have been redacted. In case the anomaly wasn't disgusting enough, it also vomits. That's right. Every couple of hours it expels a large mass of some liquidy sludge material from both sides, so to speak. After sample testing, the scientists realized it really is vomit. Well, part of it. The substance is mostly semi-digested food, fecal material, and semen, but also contains live samples of biohazardous viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Some that the Foundation haven't even encountered before SCP-835. One of these bacteria, 835-I5, is a big problem for containing SCP-835. But exactly why that is unfortunately expunged from the file as well. Between the lethal witch's brew of dangerous diseases and the diamond hard shell that covers SCP-835's internal guts, it is nearly impossible to neutralize or even damage it. Even if you do crack the shell, the diseased fluid inside would leak out and infect you full of diseases in seconds. Wow, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, so SCP-835 is a really nasty customer. I mean, just by looks alone, it's easy to tell 835 is probably nothing to mess with. But a simple visual of the thing in your line of sight does no justice in showing how actually dangerous and disgusting it really is. If you try to break it, you get your immune system overrun by a cocktail of diseases, if it doesn't manage to eat you first. The document has one addendum, an after-action report by a member of Mobile Task Force Zeta-9, the notorious Mole Rats. The Mole Rats are one of the Foundation's most elite teams of Special Operation Troops. Like all MTFs, they have a very specific specialization, one thing they do better than anyone else in the world. For Zeta-9, it's cramped spaces. The task force is highly trained in exploring dangerous, constricted areas. especially those that lie underground. From subterranean caves to endless staircases and basement labyrinths, the mole rats are the best of the best at getting in and getting out. The Mobile Task Force Zeta-9 had been performing an investigation on SCP-835, albeit when it was considerably smaller, only a meager 4 tons, and it hadn't formed a second big polyp yet. Just like usual, 4 members of the mole rats were chosen to begin the investigation, equipped with underwater isolation suits to ward off any biological threats. Lieutenant C, Sergeants L and M, and Corporal H, a rookie team member who was training with them and was ordered to only observe. They took a small underwater drone with them, one that would come in very handy. At first, SCP-835 didn't act hostile or aggressive towards the members of the team. In fact, it even allowed members to swim up to it and touch it without reacting. They couldn't even tell if it was alive or not, so they sent the drone to approach the huge polyp on the north side, while they went around to the small entrance on the other side of the rock. Corporal H was told to remain there and make sure that the power cable to the drone didn't break off or snap. Everything seemed calm. Suddenly, the drone's claw arm jerked back, having gotten stuck in something, and began thrashing around. Not wanting to wake the creature, Corporal H moved forward and tried to free the claw, but then he became trapped too. The other members of the team heard him on the radio, screaming for them to come and help him, and that he'd been grabbed by some horrible tentacle thing that was dragging him towards the polyp that had opened up into a mouth. The incident left Lieutenant C a bit ruffled afterward. Jesus Christ, I can't do this, he was just a kid! It was his first mission, I should have kept my eye on him! After a moment, she composes herself and begins to explain what happened. The anomaly grabbed Corporal H, having fooled the rest of us. What we thought was the entrance to just some cave, while the polyp on the north side was the real entrance into SCP-835. The tentacles came out of its smaller polyps, grabbed Corporal H, and began dragging him in, while he thrashed around and screamed. The boat tried to pull in the winch, but from all the activity, the line snapped in two. Corporal H was pulled inside SCP-835 and eaten. The lieutenant explains that she swam over and hooked herself to his outstretched hand when the boat began winching her up. She said just as she assured him that they're going to be fine and that she's not letting go, her line snapped, and they were both suddenly pulled inside. She breaks for a moment, before describing the inside as like a wet, pulsing tube, like how intestines look on colonoscopies. They were both steadily being pulled in by the muscle contractions, what doctors call peristalsis, the way your body moves food down your throat and through your intestines. The only reason they weren't dissolved or crushed was because of the isolation suits they were wearing, but they still couldn't move. Corporal H had vomited in his suit, but they were both alive. The lieutenant, thinking fast, figured out that if they were moving through its body, they would come out on the other end in 72 hours. They had air and water in the suits, but little battery, and if the heat went out, they would freeze to death. She quickly killed all of the lights and power in both of their suits to the minimum, except the helmet lights so they could make sure that the other was still alive. The pair stayed like that for a whole day, with absolutely nothing but the creature's digestion and their own breathing. After a while, the corporal's face was visible. He looked tired and scared. She said that 13 hours in, the kid started talking and babbling. She calmed him down and they both slept for a bit, but were rudely awoken by falling into the stomach of the creature. They both fell out into a small chamber filled with liquid, and barely a moment later, their suits began to melt in the stomach acid. She yelled and they both ran for a hole in the wall, SCP-835's sphincter. At this point, it was very clear that they made it into the intestine, and it was worse than the stomach. I'm sure you can imagine how horrifying it must have been to be in the mix of this creature's fecal waste. Disgusted and vomiting, the corporal and lieutenant picked each other up, knowing that they were making strides of this terrible ordeal. But they reached a dead stop. The creature's rectal hole was tightly shut, blocking their escape. They decided to wait, knowing that it would have to excrete eventually, and after an undeterminate amount of time, any time spent in something's intestines waiting to be pooped out is too much time. The lieutenant was shot out into the sea, but without the corporal. She is obviously angry, telling the agents to do something expunged, before declaring she needs a drink and to sleep. What a horrifying story. But there are gaps. Let's take a look at the uncensored documentation for SCP-835. First, let's go back to the containment procedures. What SCP-835 is to be fed is explained, any kind of local fish, but higher-level mammals if it goes into a rage state, including humans. In fact, it seems to calm down when digesting higher mammals. Maybe it's developed a taste for human flesh. In any case, the feeding should never happen without heavy supervision. Next, the results of performing tests on the samples of SCP-835 the Foundation was able to get. SCP-835 is no normal coral. It seems to be made from what can only be described as basic human biological components. The hard outer shell is super dense calcium, like your bones, but hundreds of times harder. The polyps are covered with the same kind of enamel that you'd find on your teeth, and the fleshy muscle that the tentacles are made of is mostly mutated tongue cells. The creature seems to have most of the biological systems we have, but they've all degraded or mutated into almost unrecognizability, except the digestive and reproductive systems, which are highly advanced. 835-I5, the bacteria unique to the anomaly, is explained. It's how SCP-835 reproduces. When vertebrates are infected with it, they will undergo a variety of symptoms, gaining huge amounts of weight despite always being hungry for things that normally can't be eaten, like wood and raw meat. Their skin will harden and form polyps across its surface. Their biological systems will slowly stop working, and they'll become aggressive. And then they will drastically reduce in intelligence and motion, except for the desire to enter the sea. Sound familiar? That's right. Being infected by it turns the victim into another SCP-835 instance, with no way to cure it. And just like it seems, SCP-835 is still somewhat aware and intelligent. At one point, this thing was a normal human. Just in case that's not horrible enough, the after-action report has also been thoroughly declassified. Let's take another look to see the real full story of what happened to Lieutenant C and Corporal H inside SCP-835. The first reveals when Corporal H was being pulled into the polyp. He was screaming and crying, begging for help. "Oh God, it's eating me! I don't want to die!" Command tells Lieutenant C to abort the mission, but she refuses to leave one of her men behind, holding his hand while hooking them together. Then the line snapped, and they were pulled in. Just as they were escaping the stomach and right as she hit the sphincter, she realized the walls of the stomach were lined with human faces, screaming and wailing and begging to be killed. She pulled her weapon out and began firing into them, and she would have melted if Corporal H hadn't pushed her through. In the intestine, the corporal began to complain of a rancid smell. She checked and realized he had a breach in his suit, but quickly patched it, but it was too late. She looked at his face, and it was growing pustules already. They burst, spraying blood, and he begged to be put out of his misery. But when the lieutenant shot her gun at him, all it produced were empty clicks. She had wasted all the ammo on the crying stomach faces. Suddenly, tentacles burst through the corporal's faceplate and simultaneously pinned the lieutenant down. She managed to flip what had been the corporal over and wrestle with what was left of him before the sphincter into the stomach, where his body began to melt in the acid. But before it did, she saw the corporal's face, smiling, and said he loved her before he died. Then she felt a burst of energy and was shot through the exit. With a troubled gleam in her eyes, she stands there telling her story to the agent. She takes a second to gain some strength and then says, "I didn't make it out intact. My suit was breached, and I didn't even realize until I took it off and saw the rash on my skin." Realizing she's going to die, she suddenly puts the room she's in on lockdown and orders the debriefing agent to evacuate everyone else aboard immediately. Just before she kills the feed, she makes one request, that the Foundation not try to decontaminate the small boat, just to abandon ship and scuttle it on top of SCP-835, on top of the corporal. That way they can be together in some kind of sick resting place. SCP-835 is the horrible tale of things that can go wrong at the Foundation, and two people doing their best in a brutal situation. But with the modern containment protocols and ensuring people know what happened to the pair, the Foundation can ensure no one ends up like the lieutenant and the corporal again. We've covered a lot of SCPs on this channel, but trust us, none of them have quite the bite that this one does. We know you like the more intellectual anomalies, and this will give you plenty to chew on in that regard. While the SCP Foundation wants to keep SCP-5940 a secret, here at SCP Explained we're gonna give you the tooth, the whole tooth, and nothing but the tooth. Truth. I meant truth. This SCP, thankfully, isn't as existentially threatening as a lot of the other ones we cover, but just because it won't send you on an express trip to the pearly gates doesn't mean it won't wreak havoc on your pearly whites. Open wide and say ah, because today we're getting into an anomaly that affects each and every one of us. Tell us, have you ever felt anxious about your teeth? Ever had that weird dream where all your teeth fall out, or even worse, someone pulls them out? Does the thought of us taking a hammer to your teeth, or them rotting away someday and making you need dentures, make you shudder and cringe? Don't be ashamed. The answer to this question for most people would be a resounding yes. And that's because of humanity's shared psychodental trauma. Don't know what that is? Well, that's fine too. After all, the Foundation has taken pains to hide all of this from you, for fear that even knowing about it might incur further psychodental stress. It's that kind of subtle but constant creeping dread you experience in a dentist's waiting room, knowing it's been too long since the last time you came in, and now you're fully anticipating him saying something like, "Well, it's a real mess in here. I'm afraid we're gonna have to take them all, and I'm gonna charge you double just because they look so unpleasant." If that feels grimly familiar to you, then you know exactly what we're talking about today. The SCP Foundation searched long and hard to find the source of this peculiar collective trauma, which, ironically, is a major factor in people not actually visiting the dentist more often, and has found the source in question to be as ancient as it is strange. To best explain exactly what we're dealing with here, we need to take a trip to the North Pole, though sorry to tell you that today's SCP is not, in fact, Santa's workshop. It's actually the northernmost point of inaccessibility, a part of the world that's nearly impossible to reach, simply by virtue of being the cluster of Arctic ice pack furthest away from any landmass, always moving and shifting. But if through some means you were ever able to make your way up there, you would find an impossibly large pair of maxillary incisors, which in layman's terms is a giant pair of front teeth. So while there may not be Santa's grotto up there, if all you want for Christmas is your two front teeth, then buddy, you're in luck. Incidentally, these two giant teeth embedded into the ground and dubbed SCP-5940 by the SCP Foundation are connected to the two front teeth of every human being on Earth. Think of it as almost a pair of giant voodoo dolls, but their effects on each individual human are relatively mild. That's because the effects are actually distributed across all humans, and the more humans there are, the less damage to the enormous pair of teeth will affect each of us. The problem is humans have 8 incisors. They're the two sets of 4 front teeth on the upper and lower jaw, and this pair of teeth covers only 2 of them. What about the rest? Well, next on our roster is SCP-5940-2. Let's join intrepid scientist and explorer Dr. John E. Namel, who has no affiliation with the SCP Foundation, on his quest to find them. Dr. Namel and his small team brave brutal colds and obscene treks through ice and snow to finally discover this grand creation near the southern pole of inaccessibility, the point of Antarctica furthest away from the Southern Ocean. When he and his men finally arrived, they gazed upon the incredible pair of teeth in awe, a mighty set of mandibular central incisors, otherwise known as the front teeth on the bottom jaw. The Foundation believes that the only way to truly solve the problems that SCP-5940 poses is to remove the various teeth from the areas where they're currently lodged. However, the Foundation doesn't yet possess the technology or resources to properly dislodge any of these behemoths. However, the psychic anticipation of the impending tooth removal has caused the psychodental trauma of people all over the world to skyrocket in the meantime. In a sense, it's like the entire world is sitting outside the dentist's office, waiting for a prognosis and hoping that when the dentist pulls out their pair of surgical pliers, they at least have the decency to give us a hit of the laughing gas first. However, the Foundation has discovered an interesting fact in the meantime. The effects of the teeth on the global population can be slightly mitigated by enacting certain forms of concussive trauma on them. And to perform this act for the greater good of the Earth's psychodental condition, Dr. John E. Namel and those accompanying him made the ultimate sacrifice. Knowing on a subconscious level what they must do, they began to turn their equipment into a kind of makeshift diving board above the giant incisors. Once the board was complete, the adventurers each took turns jumping off of it, gaining speed as they rocketed down towards the teeth below. As each of them hit the sharp upper edges of the teeth, they were cut in half, leaving a smear of red against the shining white calcium. The two halves of their bisected bodies fell down into the piles of frozen bones on either side of the teeth space, all that remained of prior brave heroes who'd made their final pilgrimage to the site of SCP-5940. While none of these various expeditions were in any way officially related to the SCP Foundation, the Foundation nonetheless extended honorary Foundation stats of merit to those who decided to take the plunge for the collective psychodental health of their fellow man. For SCP-5940-3, we have to go deeper. Literally, it's at the bottom of the ocean. Namely, it sits below Point Nemo, also known as the Oceanic Point of Inaccessibility, the furthest point away from land in the entire world's oceans. This next absurd pair of teeth, some mandibular lateral incisors, lurk below the churning ocean waves like well, there's nothing really like a giant pair of underwater teeth, is there? Thankfully, the position of these teeth have been serendipitous. Not only does their remoteness make them much harder for civilians to just stumble upon, but Point Nemo has always been a popular spacecraft graveyard. This means that during tests and sometimes even actual missions, the return trips are often piloted towards Point Nemo to prevent the risk of any errant spacecraft pieces from landing in populated areas and causing damage or death. Remember we mentioned earlier that the Foundation encourages repeated concussive attacks against the teeth to ward off their psychodental effects? Here, the pieces of spacecraft blasting into the water towards them fulfill that role. At the latest measurement, 126 of the 263 spacecraft ditched at this pole since 1971 had successfully collided with this particular pair of teeth, giving them perhaps the weakest output of psychodental trauma of any of the SCP-5940 instances. And while the furthest point in the ocean from any major land masses may seem about as remote as it gets, the last instance of SCP-5940 easily blows it out of the water. Well, not literally, but if it did, that would be a wonderful example of a problem taking care of itself, wouldn't it? The last instance of SCP-5940, SCP-5940-4, a pair of maxillary lateral incisors, live on the dark side of the moon. Yep, dentists and Pink Floyd fans of the world rejoice. You're probably wondering, while the first 3 pairs of teeth clearly grew on Earth, why is the 4th a pair of more lunar incisors? Studies performed by the Foundation on the soil around the base of the 4th set of teeth prove that they actually did originate on Earth. They believe to have split from Earth during the incident which formed the moon. This means that these teeth are literally older than the moon, and this also makes them billions of years older than humanity. So these giant teeth don't look like our incisors. Our incisors look like these giant teeth. So now we finally understand this ridiculous threat to our collective psychodental health. Move over, SCP-682, and step aside, Devourer of Worlds. Get the hell out of my face, Scarlet King. We can't deal with any of you small-timers until we solve the global psychodental health crisis posed by SCP-5940. Which elite heavy hitters have the Foundation put on the case to deal with these enamel nightmares? Meet the Department of Psychodentistry, a joint venture formed from the collaboration of the Psionics Division, a task force that specializes in psyche SCPs, the Department of Memetics, and most importantly of all, the Dentistry Division. You may be thinking, why does the SCP Foundation even need a Dentistry Division? That seems like a waste of time and resources. And if you're thinking that, you're not only wrong, you probably have horrible teeth. The Dentistry Division is the first and last line of defense that the Foundation has against a plethora of toothy anomalies, like SCP-5852, a strange phenomenon that causes human teeth to grow out of the bodies of cicadas, or SCP-2450, a condition that causes hyperdontia, the excessive development of teeth all over the bodies of mammalian creatures, with the infection being spread, appropriately, through bites. And, of course, SCP-478, a predatory moth-like creature that enters the bodies of victims under the age of 25 and attaches itself to the soft palate in the upper nasal cavity. From there, it would promote the unchecked growth of teeth on the soft palate of the victim, but that's just where it starts. Teeth develop all throughout the mouth, nasal cavity, esophagus, and even the interior of the stomach, where the digestion of the teeth leads to excruciating pain. Next time your entire body is filling up with teeth due to SCP-478, you'll really regret underestimating the value of the humble Dentistry Division. So, what does the new Department of Psychodentistry propose to do with SCP-5940, the ultimate in tooth-based anomalies? Thankfully, they have a plan that'll unfold over the next 79 years, known as the Absolute Tooth Field, in all uppercase letters. It's a three-pronged plan that's sure to fully neutralize this dental menace. You see, there's one thing we haven't told you. The psionic relationship between SCP-5940 and the incisors of all of humanity isn't one way. While the giant teeth and what happens to them can affect our teeth, what happens to our teeth can also affect the nature of SCP-5940. And that little fact is the key to the Absolute Tooth Field plan. The first part of the plan involves using mimetics to make humans shun birth control globally, accelerating population growth to 4.2% per year for the next 79 years. This will lead to a population of 200 billion humans by the year 2100. The second part will be using mimetics to encourage every human to somehow mechanically remove all of their incisors. And the third part will be the most complicated of all, trying to get all these 200 billion humans to remove the same incisors at the same time. The Department of Psychodentistry estimates that this will create the sufficient psychic force to finally pull the various SCP-5940 instances from their moorings, and thus healing humanity's collective psychodental trauma. It is a brilliant plan to take out a dangerous anomaly, and surely 1,600 billion human incisors is a small price to pay. If you've ever studied ancient Egypt in your history class, then you are probably familiar with the way they buried their pharaohs. When a king of Egypt died, their body would be entombed in a huge sarcophagus, usually after being mummified. Mummification was the process that the ancient Egyptians used to preserve their dead, safeguarding a corpse with special chemicals and the application of cloth almost like bandages. This was done to keep cadavers from decaying, usually because of the belief that this would carry over into the afterlife. And it wasn't just the Egyptians that practiced mummification either. Mummies of human beings or animals have been found on almost every continent in the world. Sometimes a body can even be accidentally mummified through exposure to extreme cold, lack of oxygen, or other environmental factors that help keep the deceased preserved. Fun fact, the oldest recorded mummy isn't even one left behind by the ancient Egyptians. It is actually a naturally mummified severed head, estimated to be 6,000 years old. It was unearthed in South America in 1936. Yes, corpse preservation techniques can indeed be strange, but none are stranger than SCP-1176. Also known by the nickname, the Mellified Man. Now, as you may have already pieced together, the Mellified Man is a mummified corpse, but not quite like the ones you would expect to find buried in the pyramids. Estimated by Foundation researchers to have been a man in his mid-30s when he died, SCP-1176 is a corpse that has degraded so much over the centuries that it has made DNA examination impossible. According to some of the SCP Foundation's best minds, SCP-1176 is possibly of Arabian ancestry, and thought to have passed away sometime during either the 10th or the 11th centuries AD. This is certainly not your ordinary mummy, and it definitely isn't like the kind you'd see in a cheesy black and white horror movie or on an old episode of Scooby-Doo. SCP-1176 is absolutely, undoubtedly dead by all clinical definitions. It doesn't show any signs of breathing, and the processes of blood circulation or metabolism have long since stopped. However, despite the decay suffered by the rest of the body, SCP-1176's brain seems to have remained intact for almost 10 whole centuries. Not just intact, but active. The Foundation's researchers have confirmed that the brain has a constant level of electrical activity, consistent with people experiencing Stage 3 non-rapid eye movement sleep, known colloquially as deep sleep. So, a mummy with an active albeit dormant brain. How does an ancient culture manage to achieve preservation like this? Alien technology? Cryogenic sleep chambers? Suspended animation? No, not quite. SCP-1176 exists in its current state in part because the body has been mellified. Now, this was a process a lot like mummification, but instead of wrapping them in cloth, a mellified man or a human mummy confection was created by submerging a dead body in honey. According to historical records, elderly men in Arabic countries would sometimes willingly volunteer themselves for this process. Why? Because the goal was to turn their bodies into a healing confection. In other words, an elaborate sweet delicacy created from a preserved corpse. That's right. Ancient cultures had candy made from dead people. All the information the Foundation has gathered about SCP-1176 seems to point to the body being one such mellified man. When extracting the remaining bodily fluids from the corpse, instead of finding blood or other normal substances, Foundation researchers discovered that SCP-1176 was full of a viscous gold-colored liquid that they designated as SCP-1176-1. Further testing of this fluid revealed it to be, you guessed it, honey. Specifically, it was a type known as clover honey, made by a species called the Anatolian honeybee. This stuff was everywhere, filling SCP-1176 entirely, so much so that honey was even coming out of the body's pores. This is due to the nature of the mummification process. Typically, before death, a person who had offered to sacrifice their own body would stop eating any food. Instead, their diet would consist solely of honey and nothing else. They would even bathe in it, submerging their entire body in the substance inside and out until their sweat and even their feces were pure honey. This honey-only diet would eventually kill the donor, and their corpse would be placed in a stone coffin, which was also filled up with even more honey. After approximately 100 years, what would be left was human mummy confection, a honey-based candy of sorts that could be then sold at street markets for a high-value price. Why was it so expensive? Well, not just because it was literally made from a dead person, but also because this confection was believed to possess rare and powerful healing properties. Everything from the common cold to broken bones was said to be cured by it. Despite it leaking out of SCP-1176, the honey doesn't seem to ever run out, even when tested under varying conditions. It seems like the mellified man actively produces more of the sweet golden substance, acting as the source rather than a container with a finite amount. And yes, it is still edible after several centuries. In fact, it contains an abundance of essential vitamins and nutrients. According to the Foundation's testing, the honey produced by SCP-1176 can suppress the feeling of hunger for up to 18 whole hours, and there are no long-term side effects for most that eat it. However, this is not the case for everyone. The Foundation has learned that any person without the blood type AB positive will have a severe allergic reaction should they consume any of SCP-1176-1. The symptoms include acute hemolysis, which means the red blood cells won't break down properly, and renal failure, which is when the kidneys stop functioning. This all results in death for most of the subjects without AB-positive blood who were fed SCP-1176-1. The symptoms for these unlucky people were the same as receiving an incompatible blood type after a transfusion. In 1985, the SCP Foundation launched a raid on a facility in Asmara, Eritrea, which at the time was owned by a group called the Mana Charitable Foundation. Agents had been dispatched to this facility after various rumors and reports that pointed to this location being the source of a strange honey substance. This anomalous liquid was being shipped to a number of areas in Ethiopia that had been stricken with famine. Pretty easy to guess where the Mana Charitable Foundation got all that honey, right? The problem was, because SCP-1176-1 caused adverse effects on people without AB-positive blood, a considerable amount of civilians had died from consuming it. Hence, the SCP Foundation was forced to step in. When SCP-1176 was first uncovered, the body had been stored inside a large stone sarcophagus, as was part of the ancient practice of creating a mellified man. There was also a copper pipe and spigot installed by the Mana Charitable Foundation to extract the honey from within. The lid, sides, and inside of the sarcophagus itself had a number of Egyptian hieroglyphics inscribed within. These were mostly spells and ceremonial texts written as a way to protect the individual that was to become the mellified man. There were also inscriptions written in the dialect that was an early precursor to the Arabic language. However, these sections had been replaced with updated versions in classical Arabic. One of these read, Abdallah ibn Salah ibn Ayyub ibn Nasir, 15th son of the great Sheikh Illegible, was put to the fast of honey on the 1st of Rajab in the year of the Hijra 3 Illegible, and died on the 15th of Ramadan. The great Imam al-Yusuf has sealed him within the ancient vessel, marked with the signs decreed by the ancients to ferment in honey for 100 years, and bring aid to the people in time of need. Much like a headstone used to mark the grave of someone who has passed, the sarcophagus that SCP-1176 was in featured a passage commemorating a man who gave his life and body to heal others. Sounds nice, right? But there was another inscription, written elsewhere on the stone sarcophagus, which translated a dire warning. "Beware, Imam, for the mark of Iblis is upon this one." According to the rest of the second inscription, the tomb containing SCP-1176 had been opened before. During a time of great famine, Imam al-Malik had ordered it to be opened so that SCP-1176-1 honey could be used to feed the starving people. Jars upon jars were filled with the anomalous golden liquid and brought to the sheikh, the ruler of the land, as well as sent to the people suffering from the lack of food. However, the very next day a number of these people fell ill, stricken by a terrible fever that ultimately claimed their lives. Only the sheikh, his brothers, and his sons, who had all eaten the honey, survived. Any others who hadn't been killed by the fever accused the sheikh and his family of sorcery, and these surviving subjects attempted to destroy the body that had produced this cursed nectar. But when the sheikh's people found the mellified man, they witnessed in horror as the body stood upright, dancing around as it screamed and taunted the people. Al-Malik declared that the devil himself sent an evil spirit to corrupt SCP-1176. The honey confection was meant to be a means of healing, but it had been corrupted. The sarcophagus was then sealed, and the inscription on it finished with the following caution to any that found it: "May God strike down any who would break these seals." Countless centuries later, once the SCP Foundation had recovered SCP-1176 and the sarcophagus containing it, they began testing with the mellified man. Their goal was to determine how much of the SCP-1176-1 honey the ancient corpse could produce, perhaps in the hopes of using this substance as a form of hunger-relieving field ration for their operatives. Removing the body from its sarcophagus, Foundation researchers placed SCP-1176 on a metal grate, designed to drain the honey as it was produced instead of allowing it to build up. Over the course of several hours, more and more honey seemed to be produced, beginning at a rate of almost a liter per hour to almost 56 liters every hour. But then, after 10.5 hours of producing what seemed like an endless flow of honey, something unexpected happened. The deceased body of the mellified man, dead for hundreds if not thousands of years, woke up. Foundation staff detected a spike in brain activity. If you cast your mind back to earlier, you'll remember that SCP-1176's brain had managed to survive and stay intact long after it should have decayed. The mellified man opened his eyes and immediately started to wildly flail around. He made a number of distressed sounds, the long dead body trying to crawl towards the outskirts of the testing chamber. Thanks to so many of its organs and muscles having withered away over the years, SCP-1176 was barely able to see or understand its surroundings. It couldn't speak, not properly anyway, given that its tongue had long since decayed. The Foundation's personnel moved in to try and restrain the ancient and now animated body, hoping to sedate it before SCP-1176 caused any lasting damage to itself. Eventually, staff were able to force SCP-1176 back into its sarcophagus, slamming the stone lid back in place and trapping it within. They could hear the once human creature screeching and vocalizing from inside, bashing against the inside of the stone coffin with its head and limbs. It took 3 whole hours of this for the mellified man to return to its usual state, by which time its ancient bones were fractured beyond repair. SCP-1176 is a sad tale of a man who had willingly given his life to be a source of healing for people in need. He allowed himself to be mellified, turning into a confection that could bring an end to famine. And yet somehow, this was corrupted and turned into something that spread fever and pestilence. For now, the mellified man sleeps, but his brain is still alive inside. While he might be asleep, he may never be able to rest. Imagine for a moment that you are a teenager. According to our viewership analytics, some of you watching this won't have to imagine very hard, but some of you will have to really stretch your mind to remember what that time was like. Either way, put yourself in the shoes of an adolescent for a little while. You're anxious and uncomfortable in your body, desperately trying to juggle your responsibilities at school, your burgeoning sense of young adulthood, your social life, the looming specter of the future, and a dozen other things that might make you stress sweat through your hoodie. Somehow, in between the classes and extracurriculars, the standardized tests, and missed party invites, you found someone who wants to go out with you. You're not sure what they see in you, but they must see something. Several months into the relationship, you decide to try and take things to the next level. You wait for your parents to leave town. You pick out the perfect Netflix and chill material, dim the lights, and cozy up together on the couch. You go in for the kiss and, shockingly, it goes over well. Then, just when things are starting to heat up, something doesn't feel quite right. You feel an overwhelming pain wash over your body. There's a flash of blinding bright light that burns into your retinas, and everything goes black. When you finally wake up, your partner is gone. Only a grisly smear of dark blood remaining, staining the couch where they sat like some kind of gory chalk outline. Somehow you know they're gone. They're never coming back, and it is all your fault. It sounds like the opening scene of a horror film, but for one unfortunate young man known as SCP-213, it was all too real. SCP-213 was recovered by the SCP Foundation in Palo Alto, California after his arrest. The local police department brought him in on charges of homicide after he accidentally vaporized his girlfriend. There were undercover Foundation agents in the Palo Alto Police Department who, recognizing this case as evidence of an anomaly, made a report and were ordered to bring the boy in for containment. During the initial attempts to apprehend 213, he vaporized the agents as soon as they made physical contact with him. 4 agents were lost before 213 could be successfully brought into a Foundation facility, where his anomalous properties could be better studied. SCP-213 is able to sever the bonds between atoms in any solid matter he comes into physical contact with. During this process, there is a bright flash of light, and SCP-213 experiences extreme pain, often to the point of passing out. Like most sentient beings in containment, he is considered a Euclid-class SCP. SCP-213 was initially contained within a high-security cell in Site-77. The cell is surrounded by a 10-meter-wide zone pumped full of gases that are corrosive to human skin. SCP-213 was informed of the nature of his containment. Outside of the containment unit, 2 armed guards were stationed with high-pressured hoses, pepper spray, and polymer web grenades in case of any escape. However, containment of 213 soon proved difficult, thanks to the nature of his seemingly uncontrollable ability. 213 made 7 escape attempts before one was eventually successful. He requested an interview with the researcher assigned to his case, knowing that when she entered his containment facility, the containment procedures would be temporarily disengaged. He vaporized the remaining containment measures and escaped from his holding cell. The head researcher attempted to grab him by the arm, but was promptly vaporized, dissolving into a pile of blood and tissue. 2 more agents who tried to block 213's path without touching him met similar fates. After making his way into the hall, 213 quickly became disoriented, his mind muddled from a mixture of pain, panic, and lack of familiarity with the layout of the facility. He was unable to find an exit and was cornered in the staff break room, the door barricaded with a chair where he was attempting to vaporize a portion of the floor. At this point, he was too exhausted to disintegrate any more matter and collapsed from exhaustion just as a group of agents broke down the door. He was, with a great deal of care and the use of a gurney to avoid any unnecessary physical contact, returned to his original containment cell. Several weeks later, SCP-213 breached containment again. However, this time, it was completely unintentional. Security camera footage from 3:15 a.m. on the day in question showed 213's bed and a portion of the floor vaporized in a flash of light, after which he fell through the opening in the floor and landed in the basement. This incident made it clear that 213 had far less control over his ability than previously believed. Rather than a purposely destructive entity, he was simply a kid who destroyed what he touched and could not do anything about it. If it could happen accidentally this time, when else could it happen? Could he potentially someday vaporize himself without meaning to? Following this containment breach, and some time to recuperate from the injuries he sustained from his fall, 213 offered to be more cooperative with the research into his condition. He agreed to comply with a series of experiments as well as routine physical examinations, and whatever else it might take to unlock the secrets of the vaporization effect. Just like the Foundation, he wanted to know why he caused this destruction and how he could stop it from happening. During one of the agreed-upon physical examinations, the research team discovered something concerning. There were smooth nodules, growths of abnormal tissue on 213's back placed in the shape of a perfect square, with exactly 15 centimeters between each one. The nodules were determined not to be tumors or cancerous in any way. They did not seem to cause the subject any pain, and he could not remember how long they had been there. Perhaps they had been there his entire life. Nothing resembling the nodules or their precise placement could be found in any public medical records or research journals. It became clear that the strange spots on 213's back were likely somehow related to his anomalous ability. Medical personnel were assigned to monitor 213 in his containment and watch for any changes, and follow-up examinations were scheduled to keep an eye on the nodules and any other potential physical symptoms. A week after the discovery of the first 4 nodules, 213 was brought back into the examination room for a follow-up inspection. There was nothing new found on the subject's back, the original nodules remaining in their place and exhibiting no change in size or shape. However, upon inspection of his hands, the research team discovered 2 more nodules. When asked if he was experiencing any pain or discomfort as a result of these nodules, 213 insisted that he only felt some mild itching and irritation on the skin around them. A doctor pressed gently on one of the nodules with his fingertips, and it did not budge. With the appearance of these additional lumps on 213's hands, the research team opted to perform a biopsy on one of them and extract a sample. A local anesthetic was administered to 213's left hand, and the doctor attempted to slice into the surface of the nodule with a scalpel. As soon as the scalpel's blade came into contact with his skin, there was a sizzling sound, a blinding flash, and when the attending researchers had regained clear vision of the room, the scalpel had disappeared. SCP-213 insisted that he had not deliberately vaporized the scalpel and offered to try again. The second scalpel met the same fate as the first, as did the third and then a 4th scalpel. After the 5th scalpel disappeared, the testing was suspended for the day, and 213 was sent back to his containment chamber to rest for the next day's testing. From that day on, 213's demeanor changed. He was less enthusiastic about continuing to research his condition, complaining of a pervasive sense of exhaustion no matter how much he slept, ate, or hydrated. He complained of extreme pain in his back and stomach, which did not respond to treatment with physical therapy or painkillers. In spite of 213's newfound apathy, the research team was determined to persist. They had come this far in their quest to uncover the mysteries of SCP-213, and they were not about to let their subjects' discomfort and a few lost scalpels stop them now. The plan for another follow-up exam and a new attempt to perform a biopsy were cut short when 213 was spotted via security camera having a seizure in his containment cell. He was moved to intensive care and kept there for further observation. Over the course of the previous 48 hours, 10 more nodules had appeared on his back, each separated by a distance of 5 centimeters. The nodules formed no discernible pattern. Once stabilized, 213 was returned to his cell, where more medical personnel were stationed alongside the guards in order to monitor his condition and watch for any further seizures or other adverse effects. 1 week later, everything would change, and the true nature of SCP-213 would finally be revealed. 213 requested his next physical exam, claiming that he had noticed something wrong with him while taking a shower. While washing his back, he was shocked to find the skin suddenly smoothed and unblemished. The nodules had disappeared, seemingly overnight. However, he was more concerned than relieved. He could not shake the feeling that, even though he could not see it, something worse had replaced them. A cursory examination could not identify anything in place of the nodules. However, a closer inspection revealed that there was indeed something there. Where there had once been lumps of tissue, there were now thin cuts, like surgical incisions less than 1 millimeter in width. Guards rushed to the examination room where the sound of a terrified scream echoed through the halls. They found the medical examiner white as a sheet and trembling. While she had been examining the incisions on 213's skin, the one on his left palm had opened to reveal an eye. Though she could not explain how, she knew that the eye was watching her, that it could see what she was doing and wanted to understand it. 213 was permanently transferred to a medical wing of the facility and placed under constant observation. The appearance of this eye sparked a new hypothesis among the research team. SCP-213's anomalous properties are not his own. Indeed, his body is not his own either. Some sort of parasite is residing within him, watching his surroundings through eyes buried beneath the skin. It is vaporizing matter in an attempt to protect itself from harm, and possibly as a means of feeding itself. When the eye first appeared and the parasite hypothesis was introduced, SCP-213 began to panic. He begged the research team to remove the parasite from his body, to cut him open and extract it by any means necessary. They refused, and 213 had to be sedated in order to keep him from attacking any of the medical staff. Whatever is living inside of 213, it does not show up on medical scans.
It cannot or will not communicate with the research team about its nature or what it might want. The more the medical team tests on it, the larger it seems to grow, with more and more tiny incisions appearing on 213's body through which the entity can look. SCP-213 had been placed in a medically induced coma until the parasitic entity can be better understood and perhaps even removed from his body. In the meantime, perhaps it is better for him and every living thing around him if he just stays asleep. Now go check out SCP-426, I Am a Toaster, and SCP-999, The Tickle Monster if you're in the mood for some SCPs that are more silly than scary.